Guys, welcome back to my latest review. Toontrack just released today The Legacy of Rock by the equally legendary Eddie Kramer. It's the latest addition to their Legend series, as they call it, starting with George Massenburg, who recorded the Call Library, up to Bob Rock, Al Schmidt, Michael Ilbert, and now we have Eddie Kramer. So it's just kind of like a consequent addition, what they started 3 years ago. And today we're going to look at this Legacy of Rock, which is, and this is what I can already reveal, 100% pure 70s, 80s, and 60s rock. So if you like those guys and their drum sound, for instance, you should definitely check this one out. So without further ado, we have a lot to cover. Let's jump in. So before we start, let's take a moment and talk about Eddie Kramer, because it's not only worth mentioning what he has been doing or what kind of engineer he is, it's absolutely important to understand the product and where this product is coming from and what goals they wanted to achieve with that. Eddie Kramer is not only a legendary engineer, he by any means and literally created the sound of rock music as we know it today, period. I mean, there are so many guys out there like Butch Vig and Chris Lord-Alge and Andy Wallace, who mixed Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit. But Eddie Kramer really, due to his work in the 60s and 70s, he created that sound that even our newer contemporary heroes refer to has been created, because he produced, mixed and engineered Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix and Kiss, just to name a few. But these are his biggest achievements and collaborations. And I'm a drummer, I'm a mixing engineer, so talking about Eddie Kramer and how he shaped the sound of John Bonham, probably one of the best rock drummers in music history, is made me excited when I heard Toontrack is working with Eddie Kramer on a product. And I think what I can really reveal here is that they really managed to capture the signature sound of Eddie Kramer and that area. And for me personally, and I think a lot of you guys who are in my age, I'm 42 now, this is kind of like a travel back into my little childhood, because I grew up and like in the 90s when I discovered my own music with all the grunge stuff coming up when Pearl Jam and Nirvana came up. But even those heroes of mine, when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, they all referenced and referred to their heroes, which were, of course, the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones. And I remember being a kid in the 80s, listening to my dad, who brought me to music, to the love of music and to drumming. And he was always listening to Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. So this is really special for me as well, hearing those sounds, and Toontrack teaming up with Eddie Kramer to create a product like that for the rest of us, because Eddie Kramer is 79 now or 78. Hopefully I pray for him that he will live much longer, but it's great that we now have his drum sound at our disposal. So Eddie Kramer, personally from my side, thanks ever so much for this product and for the music that shaped my generation of rock music. So, looking at the specs and the studio they recorded in. Quickly, the studio is the Air Studios in London, which was built and run by George Martin, the fifth Beatle, the producer of the Beatles. I think they have new premises in '92. They were and somewhere else in London, still an iconic place. A lot of great artists recorded here in the last 2 or 3 decades. Adele, Coldplay, U2, Muse, just to name a few. So a really great and special place. And And for the recordings here in the studio, they really try to capture as accurate as possible the sounds of the bands Eddie Kramer has been working on in the past, including Zeppelin, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and Jimi Hendrix. They even borrowed, and that's, you see this in one of the products videos they're going to release, or already have been released, Toontrack, that they even borrowed some vintage Helios preamps from another studio to really match 100% the sound Eddie Kramer was after. So talking about the specs, this whole SDX is pretty much packed. It's almost 200 gigabytes of samples, so I hope you have some space left on your hard disk drive. The SDX itself comes with basically 5 different drum sets in different configurations. We have this Amber kit here, which is a Ludwig Vistalite, trying to capture the sound of Led Zeppelin, especially as a reference to the famous DVD or the concert Led Zeppelin played in 60 and 76 at the Madison Square Garden. The song remains the same, which is available as a Blu-ray, I think, as well. That's the reason they captured Timpanis and a big Gong. We're going to talk about the samples, no worry, guys. So this is kind of like a replica of the sound John Bonham used, of course, including his famous Ludwig supraphonic snare drum and Paiste cymbals. Then we have, let's start with the Sparker kit here. The Sparker kit is another Ludwig kit with similar sizes John Bonham used, but he didn't play all this the time the Vistalite kit. He used this mainly for live performance in the studio and the end of the 60s when Led Zeppelin really showed up on the scene. This is the kit that John Bonham played in studio when Eddie Kramer recorded, for instance, songs like Whole Lotta Love or Ramble On, so iconic rock tunes. So this is the Ludwig badge, BO, which is black and olive badge maple kits from the 70s. Then we have, as another reference, we have the Jet Black kit, which is a Gretsch round badge kit, a reference to Charlie Watts and the sound for the Rolling Stones. We have this Oyster kit, which is another Ludwig kit, again a reference to Charlie Watts and the Rolling Stones from the 70s, vintage kit as well. And then we have this Silver kit, which is again a Ludwig kit, but this is a reference to the famous iconic drummer from Jimi Hendrix, Mitch Mitchell, which is a jazz player, educated jazz player, but this is the kit that he played in this configuration when he recorded all those albums with the legendary Jimi Hendrix. So having that said, and let's start with the Amber kit as well. So I'm gonna run you through some audio examples here. What Toontrack did and what they told me prior to this review is that in the Grooves tab here, let me jump back to the Legacy of Rock here. You see here on the left side, they distinguished the MIDI grooves kind of like tailor-made for the different kits. So what I did here is, like you see in the bottom, I created some MIDI loops that were especially made for the different kits here, so you get an idea how the kit sounds. And I'm going to run you through the default kits and the default presets and show you some of the presets later on that Toontrack brought into this product, and Eddie Kramer as well. So you already hear there's kind of like this vintage sound coming through all those vintage microphones that they used for the recording, and this big ambient sounds from the Air Studios. And what you just heard were just the default kits, so no preset going on yet. I will show you some of them later on, but you see already it's exactly what you were expecting, right? When you buy a product which has the name Eddie Kramer on it, it's punchy, it's in your face, yet it's still vintage and kind of like restrained. It's not so polished and clean as probably the Death and Darkness library from Toontrack or some other sample packs you can buy nowadays. It is exactly what you expect it is. It's a vintage rock sound, big, ambient, opened, lively. So talking about some specs, in total, we have several different snare drums you see, and all of them, and this goes for every single instrument, you see the latest or the youngest instrument they sampled in total is this 1980s Ludwig Black Beauty with the rather rare Monroe badge. But you see, we have, other than that, we have 70s, 60s. We even have a snare drum, the Slingerland Professional single-ply maple from the 1930s. So almost 100-year-old as an instrument, which is, of course, amazing. Kick drums mainly capturing the 5 kits I talked about a few minutes ago, with some variations. Sometimes they recorded it with hole and no front head. So just to get some several flavors, all of them combined, especially due to the sizes. And by the way, watching my videos, you know that I absolutely love 14 by 22 inch kick drums, because I think it's the perfect combination of low end punch, yet tight sound, especially due to the 14 inches deep. You kind of like the low end and the punch is kind of like controlled more and more focused. That's what I love about those sizes. But of course, talking about John Bonham, you need to go with a 14 by 26 kick drum. Tom wise, it is exactly what you expect from the 5 different kits. Even though you see 6 different toms here, that's the reason, because they have captured 2 different configurations with the Ludwig BO badge maple kits. You have 2 different size configurations, starting from 9 by 13 as the first rack tom, and the second one is the 10 by 14. So you have slight variations here. Same here, 16 by 16, and then 16 by 18. Not for every configuration, especially the Charlie Watt kits, because Charlie Watt just plays 1 up, 1 down configuration. That's the reason you don't get a second float tom here. But I think enough instruments to even build a bigger kit just by adding some of the toms here, so we can go with 4 or 5 tom configuration. Hi-hats are very interesting. Of course, you have the Paistis 2002, because that's John Bonham's signature hi-hat. But they went that accurately that they captured this Paisti hi-hats with the ching ring on it, because that's what John Bonham played, and that's what you know about his sound. This kind of like sometimes washy sound that you hear when he was grooving on his hi-hat. You hear those ching rings going on. And when you look at the articulations and you trigger the pedal close sound, you will clearly hear this ching ring going on. But even when you hit some of the open articulations, you always hear this little ching ring playing on in the background. So you get this indistinguishable sound from John Bonham, which is great, but you can use the Paisti 2002 Sound Edge hi-hat without the ching ring as well. Then they added the Zildjian A 1950s and the New Beats, which is more of a reference of Mitch Mitchell and Charlie Watts, so classical vintage Zildjian cymbals hi-hats, which is great. Cymbal-wise, it's okay. 3 different cymbals per slot. Of course, the Paisti Giant Beat, again, that's John Bonham. You have a Zildjian A 1950s and a 20-inch Zildjian A thin. So rather big sizes. You don't get any 16 or 15-inch stuff here, because we're talking about rock, don't we? Second cymbal slot, again, John Bonham, 20-inch. It's accurate kit that he used, 18-20-inch. Another Zildjian A from the 50s, and the second one, Zildjian A thin, as a secondary crash. This one is just 1 cymbal. It's this Zildjian A 1950s swish with rivets on it, which is an amazing effects cymbal here. So let's hear how this sounds. Nice sustain here going on. And then we have 3 different ride cymbals. Again, the John Bonham 24 Paiste big beat Zildjian A with a chain on it. So you get this kind of like little sizzle when you really riding the ride. Very accurate, accurately captured, great job. And this Zildjian Sweet Ride 23-inch, which is a great size, by the way. I like this a lot, especially this Sweet Ride. It's a great combination between the 22 and the 24. And then, as you obviously already have spotted, those timpanis here and the gong drum, which is of course absolutely amazing. Again, I told you the timpanis are part of the Ludwig Vistalite here, the Ember Vistalite. Of course, you can load them with any kit, any other of those kits. But this is again a reference to the Song Remains the Same concert at the Madison Square Garden in New York, 1976, because John Bonham used exactly that setup, and he played those timpanis with sticks. So here's a sound example because they captured those timpanis. We have a 26 Ludwig and a 29-inch Ludwig. So here's a sound example of how those timpanis sound sampled, played by Norman Gaschke from Toontrack. How could I forget, of course, the cowbell? Again, I told you this is very accurate because they wanted to exactly copy John Bonham's setup, and John Bonham used cowbells. So they sampled 2 6-inch minor steel bowl hand-hammered and a 5-inch Premier Percussion hand-hammered cowbell. And as every time, of course, you can add 2 of them by using the add instrument feature here in the top left corner. So when you want to use 2 different cowbells, here you go, you can do that easily. And of course, we have to talk about the gong. How amazing is that? We have 36-inch Paiste and a absolutely gorgeous and ridiculously big 60-inch gong drum. And when I hit this thing right now, get yourself a cup of coffee because it will take some time until this rings out. So here we go. And you can get another cup of coffee, this time even a bigger one, because now let's listen to the 60-inch gong drum. How is there any better way to end a fill or a song by hitting a 60-inch gong? I don't think so. The mixer is comprehensive. It's not that extremely overloaded like some other expansions you saw in the past, but it's still big enough that you can use different sounds and different channels that Eddie used for the recording. Beside the fact that you have the common setup with direct microphones on the kick drum, I used 2 different dynamic microphones, a condenser microphone, snare top, snare top alternative, so you can blend those two together. And in the making of video, or there's a video of Toontrack, the mic walkthrough, he explains why he uses two different snare drum microphones, which is great. One is capturing just the attack, or more like the mid-range focused attack of the snare drum, and the other one is capturing more of the low end and the girth of the snare drum. So by blending them two together, you get an amazing snare sound. We have snare bottom, of course, hi-hat 1 and 2 microphones. We have the toms captured with direct. We have a dedicated microphone on the Gong, of course, where you can enable bleeding as for every other channel. So if you want to use the Gong microphone to capture some of the kick drum, here you go. We have microphones for the timpanis. Overheads, of course, overheads mono, 3 different pairs of room microphones. And let me quickly again play the beat here for the Amber microphone. And just let's run through some examples of the room microphones, so you get an idea how you can use those room microphones to shape the sound. We have ambience mono, of course, so you can go full mono with overhead and ambience mono if you really want to go like really 60s, when a lot of recordings have been recorded in mono, with the Beatles, for instance. And we have this so-called Decatria setup, which allows you to run 5.0 recordings, or you use this setup is a combination of 3 different microphones, or 3 microphones placed as a Decatree, just as an additional ambience flavor you can add to your recordings. But let's first listen individually on the individual room microphones. We start with the ambience near because the ambience mid is loaded by default, but let's start with the ambience near, running the Amber kit here, Amber Vista Light, and the beat I created just in the beginning. And now the ambience mid. So the ambience near already is captures a lot of low end, which I like, but it's still focused and punchy. So it's not too washy as some other microphones sometimes are, room microphones. So let's disable that, and let's check the ambience mid here for now. And now ambience far. And let's go just for the sake of fun, let's just go for the full ambience as I just described, because it's sometimes changes, and you heard me saying this 1,000 times already. A drum sound is, for me, at least 80% about the room. If the room sounds great, you will very likely get a great drum sound, of course, besides the tuning of the drums and the playing, but the drum sound is really what makes, the room sound, sorry, is really what makes the drum sound. So here's the whole setup just in mono. Talking about the grooves, because I know that some of you, because I mentioned this already, and some of you guys are usually very interested. So the pack, when you buy the pack, you get this bunch of grooves here. As again, they distinguish between the different kits they sample, but of course you can use the grooves from the Ember kit with any other kit in Toontrack, of course. That's not the point here. But they sampled not only the different kits, but the different articulations, because they sampled it with hands. So poor Norman, who had to hit rim shots with his fingers in 2 different one straight and one swing for 4. Sometimes you have the option to choose between different tempos. Of course, when you listen to the grooves, it's often a reference to the bands they wanted to copy the sound of. So you get some Led Zeppelin-ish swing sounds and Charlie Watts sound and Mitch Mitchell, of course. We have the amber kits with mallets, snares off. We have the sparkle kit here. So it's not like a huge amount of grooves here, but a lot of grooves that at least get you started. And I always recommend to buy some additional MIDI packs anyway, where you can add those to the existing. SDXs usually don't come with that much MIDI packs anyway, because I think Toontrack, of course, wants to sell you some stuff afterwards. But the cool thing here is that with the brushes, the sticks, and the Timpanis, they added this performance demo, and I can show you one of them here for the hands, for instance. It's a whole performance with 41 bars. So you can, it's almost like a half of a song, so you can really listen to it a long time. So let me quickly load the drum kit here with hands, so just get an idea how this sounds when this big Ludwig and the Vistalite has been recorded with hands. It's still punchy, of course the snare wires are off, and here's the sound of this Ludwig kit sampled by the hands of Norman Gaschke from Toontrack. And finally, articulations, because they are important. Let's load the default kit again. I think Toontrack really set a new standard and level of quality in the last, let's say, 3-4 SDXs or expansion packs they released. After the release of Superior Drummer, they set the bar a little bit higher, and sometimes they just go crazy with the articulations. For instance, I just showed you already with the hi-hats. They even captured an open bell articulation, which is sometimes funny, especially for all you E-drummers out there, because there's no way on your E-drum to play the bell of the hi-hat anyway. So you can't use this articulation. But nonetheless, they captured it, and especially for the cymbals, it's really great how much articulations you can get here. And how detailed they are. So you have the crash, the bow tip, the bow shank, the bell tip, and the bell shank for each and every single cymbal here. And for the ride, it's even better because you have 2 different bow tip articulations. I think they started it with the Decades SDX when they first time did this. It's great because it's more realistic when you play a groove on the ride cymbal. You have 2 different flavors of sounds or slightly different sounds, so it sounds more realistic. Either you play it on your electronic cymbal or you program that beat. Just by alternating between the 2 different articulations, you get a way more realistic sound. So here's how they sound, for instance. So here one of them is slightly higher pitched and the other one is slightly lower because Norman hit the cymbals in different spots, and it gets more obvious when I switch to, let's say, the Zildjian Suite right here. Right, so it's kind of like, it's subtle, but it's noticeable, and it gives it just like a great addition to the overall feel here. For the Timpanis, you have center rim shot. And for the Gong, well, you just, of course, have just one hit, because it would be ridiculous to hit a rim shot at a Gong, wouldn't it be? So you see the same standard Toontrack used for their latest expansion you find even here in the Rock, even though you might consider this pack not to be used by jazz drummers. But nonetheless, Toontrack now is really saying, like, we have a certain standard of quality which we want to maintain for each and every product, no matter what this product is all about or what genre this product should capture here. And finally, one of the most important things, of course, for every single expansion pack are the presets. And Thankfully, they packed a lot of presets into that, divided by Eddie Kramer's own preset, and Toontrack always makes some presets on their own, which is great. And just to show you and going back to the grooves I built here, now this comes in handy because I now can show you just some of the presets so you get an idea. And I will show you just one each, one Eddie Kramer and one Toontrack for the different kits, so you get an idea how this pack could sound like. And let's start with Eddie Kramer, heavy comp, heavy compression. I'm always interested when you mix how he did that, and you see it's ridiculous how much he used as tape sim saturation here, but that's kind of like his sound, and you will hear the sound. It's sometimes when you just hear the drums almost too processed and too compressed, but that's exactly what you want to expect when you need like big drums in a dense guitar mix. So here's Eddie Kramer's mix preset, Amber Heavy Comp. And now let's see what Toontrack did with this Amber Vista light. So let's pick the Vista Drive. This pack and the legacy of rock, or like the whole genre, is not only about big over-the-top ambient drums. You can go pretty much dry with that. So let's pick this Jet Black here, which is this Gretsch round badge kit, a reference to Charlie Watts and the Rolling Stones. And you will clearly hear that this can sound dry as well, because that's what was part of the sound in the 70s anyway. Sometimes you had those really tight, punchy sound that didn't use much of room ambience and reverb, and that's what Eddie tried to capture here. So let's have a listen on this preset here. So what Toontrack, for instance, did, and let's switch to the Oyster kit, which is a similar tight and small punchy setup here, but what Toontrack uses here with this preset Oyster plate, for instance, it's a small setup, still it's not like those big over-the-top drums, but adding some artificial reverb, in this case a plate reverb to it, gives you best of both worlds. So you can play along and you get an idea where you can go with those sounds here of this legacy of rock SDX. So let's go for some Mitch Mitchell action here. Going to the Silver kit. The preset from Eddie Kramer is called Silver Ambience. Again, quickly looking at the mixers, you see a similar approach. Eddie is obviously a huge fan of tape saturation. So here we go, a little groove with the Silver kit from Mitch Mitchell. And finally, two examples of the Sparkle kit. Again, is a reference to the time where Eddie Kramer recorded Led Zeppelin in the studio. So the setup that's kind of like mirroring John Bonham's kit that he used in the studio time when they recorded their first albums and songs like Whole Lotta Love, for instance. So the preset is called Sparkle Mono Ambience, and the groove I'm going to pick here is one of the grooves from the MIDI library from Toontrack, which was allocated to that specific kit. So you get an idea how this sounds with the big 14x26 kick drum and the Ludwig Black Beauty Monroe badge here. And finally, an approach from Toontrack, which is always interesting. They call it hybrid drive. So they combine several instruments from different of those presets. Of course, you can use a Charlie Watts kick drum and John Bonham's toms or vice versa. That's the beauty of those expansion packs. So here's Toontrack's approach. They use the 40x22 Ludwig Vistalite no front head. So no front head means that you have a lot of like big thuddy low end coming on, not so controlled, but a lot of low ends. The Ludwig Superphonic badge from the 60s and the two Gretsch round badge toms here using the same beat as we just heard before. So, what are my 2 cents on this SDX? As I mentioned several times in my review, what I like about this SDX is, beside all the great features, and they added a ton of instruments and different sounds and presets and all that stuff, but I think the overall idea of this SDX and how they managed to solve that is worth mentioning, because this SDX is 100% and pure orientated to the sound that you were expecting from an expansion pack or drum library, which has the name of Eddie Kramer on it, because Eddie Kramer is like no one else. He shaped the music and the sound of a whole genre with the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, of course, and Jimi Hendrix. And, you know, so his name has a signature sound to it, and that's what they tried to capture, and I think they managed to do this. If you expect some modern, high glossy, punchy samples, this is probably not for you. You heard me already saying this 1,000 times, and I will continuously repeat this in my next videos. Don't let yourself be fooled by the name of those expansions. However, this whole pack and all the instruments and the samples, they have a certain flavor to it due to their age. I mean, as I said in the video, there is no single piece of instrument that's younger than 40 years. So you get some vintage stuff and vintage gear, and you get the vintage sound, but that's what you expect from an expansion pack like that. I think this can be a great addition to the core library if this is your first expansion pack, or if you already own some of them, like the latest ones, the Death and Darkness, for instance, or even the Rock Foundry from Bob Rock, which I know a lot of you guys pulled the trigger on when it was released. But there was always this gap to capture that sound from the 60s and 70s, which has a certain flavor to it, which was more raw and more wild and not so polished and not so perfect. And I think if you are after that sound, you should consider buying this expansion pack. It's quite heavy on CPU load and quite heavy in pure size. You need almost 200 gigabytes on your external hard disk drive, so you might want to consider that. But once you get it, it's absolutely pure 100% Eddie Kramer sound, and I think that's what they promised, and that's what you get. I think that this pack, however, would still work in modern day productions. As I always advocate, it's not about that you try to exactly copy a sound that's already existing. It's kind of like expand your ideas and expand your options and your tools in your arsenal. So there's no problem in producing a modern pop singer-songwriter song and using samples like that, just to add a certain flavor to it, which you cannot replicate using modern sample libraries from other manufacturers or even from Toontrack. So it's 100% consequent 70s rock by Eddie Kramer, and that's what you get. And I think Toontrack made a good job on that. I don't miss anything here. I think the amount of cymbals and instruments are decent, and you get everything from rather dry and punchy up to larger than life, like the Ludwig kit from John Bonham, including the timpanis, the gong, the hands, the brushes. So it's not just 100% just rock. So you get a lot of options here. Great addition to the lineup. Again, great work by Toontrack. If you have any questions about this product, leave a comment below. You will find all my latest in-depth reviews about the latest or former SDXs in the description box or somewhere here on the screen. As always, thanks ever so much, guys, for watching. Have a great time making music, and peace. I'm out.